When a gang firebombed Sarah's home, the police officer sighed and said, "We'll investigate." He had already ignored her pleas for help twice. The system had officially abandoned her and her 7-year-old son to the wolves. But an old veteran down the street knew the system was broken. He made one call, not to 911 but to the local Hells Angels charter. He told them the kind waitress from the diner was in trouble, and the one man she'd given a free coffee to was now bringing 800 brothers to deliver a kind of justice the police couldn't. Before we dive deeper into story, I need to know, where are you watching this from? Help us get this channel to 1,000 subscribers. God bless you for joining the family. In the hollowed-out heart of the American Rust Belt, there exists a city called Gary, Indiana. It's a place that smells of cold steel and damp ash, a graveyard of industrial dreams. This is where Sarah lives, or perhaps survives. She's in her early 30s, a single mother to a 7-year-old boy named Liam, whose small lungs fight a daily war with chronic asthma. Sarah is the personification of exhausted resilience. She is a good person being slowly, methodically crushed by the sheer weight of her life, a ghost haunting her own existence just to keep her son breathing. She works 2 minimum wage jobs, a 24-hour shift at the Crossroads Diner, and a night shift scrubbing the floors of a factory that's 1 bad quarter away from closing for good. Her entire life is a ledger of small debts and profound fears. Before we dive into the night that changed everything for her, I have to ask, where are you watching this from? Drop your city, your state, your country in the comments right now. Let us know what corner of the world you're representing. Sarah's corner was bleak. The small rented house she fought for, the one with the peeling paint and the drafty windows, was her only fortress. It took her 2 solid years of saving every single dime, every extra tip, just for the security deposit, just to get Liam out of a crime-infested apartment complex where sirens were the nightly lullaby. The Crossroads Diner is its own character, a time capsule of American hope that's now cracked and faded. The neon sign outside buzzes, flickering against the perpetually gray Indiana sky. Inside, the vinyl on the booth seats is split and mended with silver duct tape. The air is a permanent fog of stale coffee and hamburger grease. This is Sarah's stage. Here, she's not just a waitress in a pink faded uniform. She's a confessor, a road-weary trucker's therapist, and often the only kind smile a person will see in a 1,000-mile run. She is both essential and completely invisible. Her son, Liam, is her entire world. He is her anchor, and he is her constant terror. Every wheeze that escapes his small chest is a countdown clock that ticks in Sarah's head. The damp, cold air of their rented house settles deep inside him. His asthma isn't just a medical condition. It's a financial weapon pointed directly at her. Every trip to the emergency room, every refill for his inhaler, is a brutal choice. Does she pay the heating bill this month, or does she buy the medicine that keeps her child alive? This is the quiet, daily desperation that grinds good people down. But the system, the poverty, the bone-deep exhaustion, it hasn't broken her core. This is the quiet miracle of Sarah. She still sees the humanity in the grizzled, angry faces that sit at her counter. She still splits her 1 employee meal sandwich with the homeless veteran who sleeps behind the diner's dumpsters. Her purity isn't born of naivete. It's an act of daily, defiant rebellion. She stubbornly refuses to let the cruelty of the world make her cruel. She is a lighthouse, still shining in a dense fog of absolute indifference. Gary, Indiana, is the ghost of the American industrial engine. It's a city haunted by the colossal skeletons of what it used to be. The massive steel mills stand, silent guard against the sky. The streets are a broken checkerboard of neatly kept lawns, owned by families who've been there for generations, right next to burned-out, boarded-up shells. This isn't just a location. It's a feeling. It's the palpable, suffocating feeling of being left behind. It's the certain knowledge that when you scream, absolutely no one is coming to help. The social contract here was breached decades ago. Sarah is completely, devastatingly alone. She has no family to call, no safety net to catch her fall. Her isolation is a heavy cloak she wears at all hours. The other waitresses at the diner are just as broke and exhausted as she is. The customers are transient shadows, passing through on the interstate. state. She's an island of decency in a vast cold ocean of neglect. This is the vulnerability that predators can smell. They see her kindness not as the strength it is, but as a resource to be exploited, a fatal weakness to be preyed upon. Her life is a relentless loop. Wake up before dawn. Put her ear to Liam's chest to check his breathing. Get him to the neighbor's house. Work the diner's breakfast rush, smiling through insults and impatience for tips that will barely cover the gas to get home. Run to the factory. Scrub toilets and office floors until her hands are raw and red. Pick up Liam. Make dinner. Read him a story about knights and dragons, promising a future that feels more and more like a lie. Collapse into bed for 4 hours. Repeat. The grind is designed to make her invisible. She is the moral compass of this entire story. She is the before picture of a broken system. Sarah represents every single person who played by the rules but is still losing the game. She pays her taxes. She works hard. She is polite. She is kind. And for all this, she is rewarded with a crushing, unpayable debt and a profound, gnawing fear. The world has given her every single reason to become bitter, to cut corners, to be selfish. Her stubborn refusal to do so is what makes her a hero long before the thunder ever arrives. This quiet, desperate existence was balanced on a razor's edge. It only needed one small push to send it all collapsing into the abyss. That push wasn't going to come from the banks or the hospital bills. Not directly. It was coming from the shadows of her own neighborhood. A different kind of decay. A humankind, one that festers in the hollowed-out parts of cities like Gary, a predator who saw her daily struggle and mistook her quiet, unshakable dignity for weakness. And that predator was about to make a fatal miscalculation. The night it all began, the sky tore itself open. This wasn't just rain. It was a biblical deluge straight off Lake Michigan, a violent assault of wind and water that rattled the diner's plate glass windows. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The Crossroads Diner was a pocket of light in the oppressive dark, empty save for Sarah wiping down the counter and 2 truckers nursing cold coffee in a back booth. The world felt like it was ending. The fluorescents hummed, buzzing against the sound of thunder that cracked like artillery fire. It was the kind of night that kept decent people locked behind their doors. The bell above the door didn't just jingle. It slammed open, driven by the wind. A wall of cold air and rain blasted into the diner, and in the doorway stood a man who looked less like a person and more like an event. He was massive, 6'4", easily 300 pounds of soaking wet leather, road-grimed denim, and pure, condensed rage. He dripped a large puddle onto the black and white linoleum floor. The truckers in the booth froze, their hands hovering over their cups. This wasn't a customer. This was a threat. His face was a map of hard miles, marked by ink and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. This was Wrench. He was the road captain for a Hells Angels charter, a title earned in blood, loyalty, and thousands of miles of asphalt. His Harley-Davidson had thrown a rod on I-90, a catastrophic failure in the middle of a monsoon. He was stranded, he was furious, and he was soaked to the bone. His cut, the leather vest that was his second skin, the one bearing his club's sacred patch, was black with rain. He stomped the water from his heavy boots, his eyes scanning the diner, expecting what he always got: fear, judgment, or a challenge. He was a monster in a world of civilians. The air in the diner turned to ice. The cook in the back, who had peeked through the service window, vanished. The 2 truckers suddenly found the patterns in their tabletops intensely interesting. This is the power of the 1%er patch. It signifies a life lived entirely outside the rules, a violent rejection of polite society. Wrench represented a raw, untamed, and dangerous force. People saw the tattoos, the leather, the skull rings, the scowl, and they didn't see a man. They saw a symbol of violence. They saw every movie villain, every terrifying news report, every stereotype made real and breathing. Wrench braced himself for the inevitable confrontation. He was used to it. "We don't serve your kind here," or "Sir, you're going to have to leave." He clenched his gloved fists, ready for the conflict. But Sarah ... Sarah just blinked, her exhaustion momentarily overshadowed by the sheer size of him. She saw the river of water pooling at his feet. She saw the mud on his boots. She saw a man who was, in that exact moment, having a worse night than she was. She didn't see the patch. She saw the person. She turned, grabbed a clean, dry bar towel from under the counter, and walked right up to him. The truckers held their breath. Wrench tensed, thinking she was about to tell him to get out. Instead, she held out the folded white towel. "You look like you're drowning out there," she said, her voice soft but not shaking. He just stared at the towel, confused. He took it. She then walked back behind the counter, grabbed a heavy, beige ceramic mug, and poured it full of steaming black coffee. She slid it onto the counter in front of the stool he hadn't even sat on yet. "This one's on the house. Nobody should be stuck in a storm like that." Wrench was stunned. Absolutely, completely floored. This was not the script. In his world, kindness was a transaction. It was a sign of weakness, or it was a prelude to a betrayal. It was never ever free. This woman, this slip of a thing who looked like a strong breeze, would knock her over, had just shown him simple, unadulterated human decency. He, a man who inspired active fear in hardened criminals, was being treated like just another soul caught in the rain. He stared at the coffee, then at her. His hardened gaze softened, just for a fraction of a second. He sat down. The chrome stool groaned under his weight. He didn't drink the coffee right away. For the next hour, as the storm raged outside, he just watched her. He nursed the hot mug, the warmth seeping into his cold, calloused hands. He watched her refill the trucker's cups, giving them a tired smile. He watched her patiently and kindly handle a drunk who stumbled in, guiding him back out the door without judgment or fear. He saw the deep purple circles under her eyes. He saw the way she rubbed her lower back when she thought no one was looking. He saw her exhaustion, but he also saw her grace. Wrench knew this world. He lived in a society that judged him on sight. He was the bad guy. He was the outcast, the monster they told their children stories about. He had accepted this long ago. He wore it as armor. The world was a cold, hard, judgmental place, and he was a cold, hard man. He and his brothers lived by a code, a fierce, unbreakable loyalty that the civilian world couldn't possibly understand. They were the wolves, and everyone else in the world was either sheep or a rival wolf. He had no place in this polite, fragile diner. Yet here was this woman, arguably one of the sheep, treating him with a basic respect he hadn't been shown by a stranger in decades. She wasn't afraid of him, or maybe she was, but her compassion was stronger than her fear, and that was a kind of bravery he understood. That was honor. She hadn't asked him what patch he wore, what crimes he'd done, or where he was going. She just saw a man who was cold and wet, and who needed coffee. In her simple, quiet act, she had honored him. The storm finally broke. The deluge eased to a steady drizzle. Wrench heard the rumble of his club brothers' trucks arriving outside, coming to fetch him and his broken bike. He stood, his massive frame blocking the fluorescent light. He pulled a crumpled $50 bill from his wet jeans, far more than the coffee and the pie he'd eventually ordered would cost. He threw it on the counter. "For the trouble," he grunted. Sarah immediately pushed it right back toward him, her small, clean hand next to his scarred, massive fist. "I told you. It's on the house," she said, managing a small, tired smile. "You're already having a bad enough night. Save your money for the bike repairs." Wrench stared at her. This was the second time she had shocked him into silence. Refusing his money was more than kindness. It was a powerful statement of principle. She hadn't been nice to him to get a big tip. She wasn't playing an angle. She was just good. In his world, a debt was always paid, and she had just refused payment. This created new kind of debt, an honorable one. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the name tag pinned crookedly to her faded pink uniform. It read, in simple black letters, Sarah. He nodded, a slow, deliberate, heavy gesture. It wasn't a thank you. It was a vow. It was a promise of reciprocity that she, in her civilian world, couldn't possibly understand. He burned her face, her name, and this single moment into his memory. He was Wrench, the road captain. He forgot nothing, and he never, ever left a debt unpaid. He turned and walked out the door, the bell jingling softly this time. He stepped back into the damp, cold night, leaving the warmth of the diner behind. Sarah watched him go, a giant of a man climbing into the passenger seat of a jacked-up pickup truck. She sighed, relieved the tension was finally gone, and went back to wiping down the counter. She had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea that her simple $2 cup of free coffee was an investment. A co-soda had no idea that her simple $2 cup of free coffee was an investment. Prayer she didn't even know she was making. That single act of kindness was a stone dropped into a very dark, very violent pond. Sarah forgot about it almost instantly. It was just another strange moment in another long night. But for Wrench, It was a profound anomaly. He thought about it the entire ride back to the clubhouse. A good person. A genuinely good person, trapped in a shithole town, being slowly crushed to dust by life. He told his brothers about her, not as a story, but as a report. The world still got a few good ones left in it, he said, and the club filed that information away. This is the pivot. This is the moment the entire universe balanced on. On one side, the casual, predatory cruelty of the streets, a cruelty that was already watching her. On the other, the fierce, codified, and absolute loyalty of the bikers. And in the middle was Sarah, a civilian who had no idea she was standing at the crossroads of two warring moral codes. She had just shown kindness to a lion, having no idea that a pack of hyenas was already circling her home, watching her, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Now meet Skinner. He's the polar opposite of Wrench's honor. Skinner is the leader of a local street crew that calls itself the Rust Devils. They aren't an organized crime syndicate. They are a cancer. They are the pathetic product of urban neglect and profound boredom, petty tyrants of a few burned-out blocks. Skinner, all of 22, but with the dead, empty eyes of a much older man, thrives on the fear of others. He sees the world in only two categories: things he can take and things he has to wait to take. He is a coward who only hunts in a pack. Skinner had been watching Sarah for weeks. He saw her exhaustion. He saw her beat-up 1998 Toyota parked on the street. He saw her 7-year-old son, small and frail. And he saw weakness. He saw a target that wouldn't and couldn't fight back. In his twisted, pathetic worldview, her simple attempt to build a decent life in his territory, that small rented house, was a personal insult. Her kindness, which he'd witnessed at the diner, wasn't a virtue. It was a vulnerability to be exploited. He decided she needed to pay for the privilege of being afraid. It started small, as cowardice always does. The Rust Devils were just testing the waters, like sharks bumping their prey. One morning, Sarah woke up to find her wooden fence spray-painted with the gang's crude, ugly tags. The next week, she came out from her exhausting night shift to find 2 of her tires slashed. It was a crippling blow. That was her grocery money for the next 2 weeks. That was Liam's inhaler money. It was an act designed to terrorize, to make her feel small and powerless. And it was working. The fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach that never went away. Sarah did what the system tells you to do. She did what every civics class in America teaches. She picked up the phone and she called the police. She still believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that they were there to protect her. She filed a report. She waited for hours, missing precious sleep she couldn't afford to lose, for an officer to finally show up at her door. She held onto the fragile, fading hope that the badge and the gun actually meant something, that there was still a line between order and chaos, and that she was on the right side of it. Officer Miller arrived. He was not a savior. He was a symptom of the city's terminal decay. He was a man just 2 years from his pension, a man who had seen it all and now cared about none of it. He sighed before she even finished her sentence. He looked at the slashed tires, his notepad stain clipped to his uniform. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with a corrosive bureaucratic boredom, "this is vandalism. You live in a rough neighborhood. What do you want me to do about it? Stake out your house?" He was annoyed at her for being a victim. He offered her the standard, completely useless advice. "Honestly, they're just kids. Punks. Don't give them the satisfaction." He looked at her house with disdain. "Maybe you should install some cameras. Get a better deadbolt. Just ... Lock your doors." His words were a quiet death sentence. He wasn't just failing to help her. He was actively communicating to her that she was, in no uncertain terms, on her own. He took his notes, gave her a report number she could use for her insurance, and left. He was back in his warm cruiser before she had even closed her front door. This absolute indifference was Skinner's green light. He and his crew had watched the police car come and go in under 10 minutes. They laughed about it. The system didn't care. The law was a joke. Officer Miller's visit hadn't warned them off. It had emboldened them. It confirmed what they already knew in their bones. Sarah was alone. There would be no consequences. There was no one coming to save her. She was officially a free target. The predators now had explicit permission from the system itself to attack her. The very next day, Skinner escalated. He caught her walking from her car to her front door, Liam's small hand clutched tightly in hers. The crew fanned out, blocking her path on the sidewalk. Skinner, smiling with rotten teeth, explained the new rules. He told her she needed protection to live on this street. Protection. From him, he demanded $200 a week, a neighborhood tax, It was money Sarah didn't have. It was more than her entire grocery budget for the month. Her entire life savings was already gone, spent on replacing the tires. Sarah looked at this sniveling, arrogant coward, and something inside her, something stronger than her bone-deep fear, took over. She thought of Liam. She thought of the years she had spent scraping by, fighting for every inch. She would not be this man's victim. She clutched Liam's hand tighter, pulled him behind her, and said one word, no. She pushed past him, her heart hammering against her ribs, and got inside her house, fumbling with the lock. It was the bravest thing she had ever done, and it was the thing that sealed her fate. She had defied him. Skinner was enraged, but he waited. He let her stew in her own fear for a week. Sarah, meanwhile, was frantic. She called the police again. She told Officer Miller that she was being extorted, that she and her son had been threatened. His response was even worse this time. Ma'am, did he physically touch you? No. Did he show you a weapon? No. Then it's his word against yours. There's no crime here. He's just talking. My advice? Try to avoid him. The system had officially, finally, and completely abandoned her to the wolves. This is the precise moment the story demands justice. The safe institutions, the ones we pay for with our taxes, the ones we are told to trust our entire lives, have failed. The police, the law, the system, it was all a hollow lie. It was a bureaucratic machine that protected itself, not the people. This failure creates a moral vacuum. And when the law refuses to act, when it protects the predators by ignoring the prey, it invites another, older, and far more decisive kind of law to take its place. 2 nights after her second useless call to the police, Skinner decided to teach her a lesson. He wanted to make an example of her. It was 2 a.m. Sarah and Liam were asleep. The rust devils crept through the darkness, their faces masked. They weren't just going to break a window. They weren't just going to spray paint the walls. They came carrying glass bottles filled with gasoline, with dirty rags stuffed in the necks. They had come to burn her out, to erase her. It was a petty act of profound, cowardly, and unforgivable evil. The sound was a deafening underscore, whoosh underscore, that ripped the night apart. The Molotov cocktails shattered against the cheap wooden porch. The old, dry wood ignited instantly. Flames climbed the walls, bright orange and hungry, licking at the night sky. The fire alarm inside shrieked. Sarah woke to a room full of thick, black, choking smoke. Her first thought, her only thought, was Liam. She ripped him from his bed, his small body limp with sleep, and ran through a hallway that was already a roaring inferno. The heat seared her skin. She burst out the back door, collapsing onto the damp grass, gasping for air. Liam, terrified, began to cough a deep, barking, terrible cough that signaled the smoke had triggered a severe asthma attack. Sarah held her son, her body covered in soot, and watched as everything she owned, every paycheck she had ever saved, every photograph of her son, every piece of her life, turned to ash. The house was a pillar of fire against the dark, gary sky. She was homeless. She was penniless. She had nothing left. Officer Miller showed up, this time with the fire department. He stood there, his arms crossed, watching the flames consume the roof. Sarah, shaking, her voice raw from screaming in smoke, saw him. I told you. She shrieked at him. I told you he would do this. Miller just looked at her, his face unreadable in the flashing red and blue lights. He pulled out his notepad. Ma'am, you don't know who did this. We'll investigate. It was the final, hollow, bureaucratic insult. The system hadn't just failed to protect her. It was now failing to even acknowledge the truth. But someone else was watching. An elderly man, Mr. Henderson, lived too. Doors down. A Vietnam veteran. A quiet man who kept to himself. He had seen the rust devils lurking. He had seen the police car come and go. And days earlier, he had been at the diner and seen the entire encounter between Sarah and the massive biker Wrench. Henderson was a Marine. He recognized the patch. He knew what kind of man Wrench was. He knew what the Hells Angels meant. He knew they lived by a different code. Henderson watched Sarah sitting on the curb, clutching her wheezing son, wrapped in a single thin Red Cross blanket. He saw Officer Miller's complete and total indifference. He knew the investigation would go nowhere. The system was broken. So he turned around, went inside his own tidy house, and pulled out an old, dog-eared address book. He hadn't used the number in 30 years, but he had it. A direct line to the Hells Angels clubhouse in the next county. He knew this wasn't a police matter anymore. This was a matter of honor. The phone rang in a clubhouse that was loud with music and laughter. A patched member answered. Henderson's voice was quiet but firm. This is Gunny Henderson, 3rd Marines. I need to talk to Wrench. Tell him. The waitress at the crossroads, the good one. A local punk named Skinner and his crew just firebombed her house. They burned her out. The kid, he's asthmatic. They almost killed him. The cops are doing nothing. The message was relayed. And the clubhouse, seconds before roaring with life, went dead silent. Utterly, terrifyingly silent. The silence in that clubhouse was heavier and louder than any sound. It was a vacuum of sudden cold disbelief, which quickly solidified into a diamond-hard collective rage. Wrench, who had been at the bar, stood up slowly. Every eye in the room was on him. The club president, a man known only as Prez, simply looked at Wrench. Not a single word was needed. A line had been crossed. This wasn't a club matter. This wasn't about territory or business. This was about honor. They hadn't just attacked a civilian. They had attacked an innocent who had shown honor to one of their own. Wrench's face was stone. The debt he owed, the one for the free coffee and the towel, had just been called in, and the interest on that debt was going to be biblical. "She gave me coffee," Wrench said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "She gave me a towel. She treated me like a man, and they burned her home, with her kid inside. That was it." The president nodded once. The call went out, not just to their charter, but to 3 others in the tri-state area. This was not a warning. This was a church call, a mandatory immediate gathering. The time was 3 a.m. The street was still thick with the chemical smell of smoke and wet ash. Sarah was sitting in the back of an ambulance, holding Liam as he breathed through a nebulizer. Officer Miller was getting ready to clock out, his useless arson report filed. In a park 3 blocks away, Skinner and the Rust Devil were celebrating. They were drinking stolen beer, laughing about the fire, feeling like kings. They were the apex predators of Gary, Indiana. They were untouchable. They were dead wrong. It started as a vibration, not a sound, a feeling. It was a tremor in the pavement, a deep, seismic pulse that Officer Miller felt in the fillings of his teeth. He spilled the last of his cold coffee on his uniform. He looked up, annoyed, expecting the heavy semi-truck, but the vibration didn't pass. It grew. It swelled. It became a low, guttural roar, like 1,000 lions clearing their throats at once. It was the sound of rolling thunder, but the sky was perfectly clear. Then they appeared. From the darkness at the end of the street, a single bright headlight, then 2, then 20. A river of chrome and steel flooded the block. It wasn't a gang. It was an army. They rolled in, 2 by 2, in perfect disciplined military formation. They didn't rev their engines. They didn't shout. They moved with the terrifying silent professionalism of a cavalry unit. The ground itself trembled under the collective weight of 800 Harley-Davidson engines. It was a beautiful, terrifying invasion. Every light in every house on the street clicked off. Neighbors peered from behind their curtains, their hearts hammering in their throats. This was not a police response. This was something else, something primal. Officer Miller stepped out of his car, his hand hovering near his weapon, but he knew instantly how useless it was. He was pale, suddenly realizing how small and insignificant his authority was. This was a force of nature. He was just a man with a notepad standing in the path of a tidal wave. The laughter in the park died instantly. Skinner's smug smile froze, then collapsed into pure, abject terror. The beer bottle slipped from his hand and shattered on the pavement. The Rust Devils stopped moving. They were rabbits who had just realized the entire forest was now filled with wolves. The bikers didn't even look at them. They continued their procession, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist, a seemingly endless column of leather and steel. They were a judgment. The bikers systematically encircled the entire block. They formed a perfect, impenetrable perimeter. They blocked the street at both ends. They surrounded the park, cutting off all escape. They formed a human wall of leather, separating Sarah's burned-out home from the rest of the world. They did this without a single word, communicating with the precise hand signals of combat veterans. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. The entire neighborhood was now their territory. They were in control. The engines clicked off, one by one, plunging the street into a sudden, deafening silence. The only sound was the crackle of the dying embers and Liam's small, wheezing cough. Then, Wrench dismounted. He walked past Officer Miller as if he were a statue. He walked past the cowering, frozen Rust Devils as if they were trash on the sidewalk. His focus was singular. He walked directly to the ambulance where Sarah sat, shaking, wrapped in a thin Red Cross blanket. Wrench, the mountain of a man who had terrified the diner, stopped in front of her. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with a new, different kind of fear. He didn't speak. He simply reached up, unzipped his own cut, the sacred leather vest that held his rank, his identity, his entire life, and he took it off. He bent down on one knee, a giant bowing to the forgotten, and he gently, carefully wrapped his heavy vest around her shoulders. It was warm, and it smelled of leather and the road. "We got this, ma'am," he growled, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't place. "You're safe now, you and the boy, your family." Sarah just stared, clutching the heavy leather to her chest. It was the first time she had felt safe in months. She started to cry, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic relief. The monster she had been kind to, he wasn't a monster at all. He was a guardian. Now the prez of the charter, flanked by two massive sergeants-at-arms, turned his attention to the park. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward Skinner, who was visibly shaking, unable to move. The Rust Devils were surrounded. 800 bikers were watching them. There was no escape. The president stopped a foot from Skinner. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence was a crushing weight. "You," he said, his voice calm and cold, "have made a very serious mistake." Officer Miller, remembering his job, started to walk over, his hand on his radio. "All right, fellas, let's just calm down, ... double quotes." The president didn't even look at him. He just held up one gloved hand. A universal stop sign. Miller stopped. He knew he was hopelessly, comically outmatched. He was a witness now, not an officer. The true power, the true justice had arrived. It wasn't wearing a blue uniform. It was wearing leather patches. The system's failure was now complete, and its impotence was on full display. The bikers didn't come to start a war. They came to one. They came to deliver a message that the broken, hollow system couldn't. If you believe that real power should be used to protect the innocent, not to shield the predators, smash that like button right now. Your engagement proves that people still care more about real justice than they do about hollow procedures. The bikers were the procedure now. They were the judge, the jury, and the collectors of the debt. The president explained the new situation to Skinner, his voice dangerously calm. "You burned a good woman's home. You terrorized her child. This is an offense to us." He gave him two options. Option A, the bikers would turn Skinner and his crew over to a rival, far more violent Chicago gang they had business with, along with proof of Skinner's other, more serious crimes. They would not survive the night. Or option B, they would pay in full, right now. Skinner, crying now, snot and tears running down his face, blubbered, "Option B, please." The president nodded. "Empty your pockets, all of you." Under the glare of 800 angry men, the Rust Devils frantically emptied their pockets. Every dollar from drug sales, every bit of extortion money, every crumpled bill. It was a pile of thousands in dirty cash. A biker collected it, walked it over to the ambulance, and placed the entire wad of money in Sarah's lap. "A down payment," the president said, "for her inconvenience." But they weren't done. The bikers hadn't just come to intimidate, they had come to fix. As the sun began to hint at the horizon, a new sound was heard, the rumble of diesel engines. Two massive flatbed trucks, prearranged by the club, rolled up. They were loaded with lumber, drywall, wiring, and roofing shingles. The bikers, it turned out, were not just bikers. They were electricians, plumbers, contractors, and carpenters. They were veterans. They knew how to build. They knew how to restore. The president pointed at the stacks of lumber. "Your crew," he said to Skinner, his voice flat. "You're the cleanup detail. You will unload every single piece of this. You will haul every bag of burned trash. You will work until my men say you are done." The Rust Devils, the terrifying gang, were reduced to manual laborers. They were forced, under the watchful, silent eyes of the men they'd pretended to be, to carry lumber, tear down the burned-out frame, and clean the debris. It was the ultimate public humiliation. As dawn broke over Gary, a surreal, incredible scene unfolded. An army of Hell's Angels, their vests on, hammers in hand, began to rebuild Sarah's home. The sharp, clean sound of saws and hammers replaced the sound of sirens and crying. They worked with a terrifying military efficiency, and the Rust Devils were forced to serve them, running for tools, hauling trash, publicly shamed and spiritually broken. They weren't just fixing a house. They were restoring a life. They were showing the entire city what real justice looks like. Sarah sat on the ambulance bumper, Wrench's heavy vest still around her, holding a sleeping Liam. She watched, in stunned, absolute silence, as the very men society had told her to fear her entire life became her saviors. The bad guys were rebuilding her life piece by piece, while the good guys had done nothing but take notes. The terror of the night was finally completely washed away by a flood of chrome and leather, and a code of honor she never knew existed. The debt for a simple cup of coffee was being paid in full. By noon, the transformation was staggering. The burned-out, skeletal frame of the porch was gone. A new, solid, pressure-treated frame stood in its place. The roof was being reshingled. The sharp, clean smell of sawdust and fresh-cut lumber completely overpowered the lingering stench of ash. The bikers worked in tireless, disciplined shifts. The rust devils, exhausted, filthy, and spiritually broken, were forced to watch. Their pathetic reign of terror ended not by the police, but by a code of honor they couldn't possibly comprehend. Their power was an illusion, and it had just been shattered in front of the entire world. When the bikers' foreman, a man with Builder on his patch, decided the gang's labor was done, the president approached Skinner one last time. He wasn't released. He was banished. "We own this town now," the president stated, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. "You and your crew are done here. If we see you, if we hear about you, if you so much as jaywalk in Gary again, we won't be bringing lumber." Skinner and his crew, stripped of their money and their pride, ran. They literally ran down the street and never, ever looked back. The neighbors who had hidden behind their curtains slowly started to emerge. They saw the monsters hanging drywall. They saw the thugs checking the electrical wiring, arguing over code. An older woman came out with a tray of sandwiches. A few men brought cases of water. The fear that had defined the street was replaced by a surreal, profound sense of awe. The community was forced to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. They had judged these men by their leather, and in doing so, had completely missed their hearts of steel. And Officer Miller? He had simply left. Sometime during the construction, he had quietly disappeared. Faced with a justice system that was actually functional, efficient, and decisive, his own bureaucratic impotence was too much to bear. He got in his car and drove away. There was no report to file that could possibly capture this. The law had failed, and honor had taken its place. The police had become irrelevant, a forgotten footnote in a story that was now being written by stronger, more capable hands. The system had retreated in the face of true accountability. By nightfall, the house was not just repaired, it was better. It was stronger. It had new windows, a reinforced steel door, and a freshly painted porch. Inside, the bikers had done more. Other members had arrived in pickup trucks. They brought a new bed for Liam, a new couch. They brought bags and bags of groceries, stocking her empty kitchen and pantry. They brought new clothes for Sarah and new toys for Liam. They didn't just rebuild her house. They rebuilt her home. They erased the attack as if it had never even happened. As the bikers prepared to leave, the president approached Sarah. She tried to give Wrench his vest back, her hands shaking, but he held up a hand. "You keep that, man. That's family." Then another biker, the club's tailor, stepped up. He handed Liam a small, child-sized black leather vest. It was blank, except for one patch on the front, over the heart. It said, "Protected property of the Hells Angels." Liam, his breathing now steady, looked at the vest and smiled for the first time. He was no longer a victim. He was protected. Wrench was the last to leave. He looked at Sarah, who was standing on her new porch, wrapped in his vest, holding her son. She had no words. She just looked at him, her eyes overflowing with a gratitude that was deeper than any language. Wrench simply gave her that same slow, heavy nod he'd given her in the diner. The debt was paid. He put on his helmet, threw his leg over his restored Harley-Davidson, and with a final, earth-shaking roar, he and his brothers disappeared into the Indiana night. Sarah and Liam stood on their porch, safe. The street was quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of peace. Sarah was no longer the invisible, exhausted woman. She was the woman the Hells Angels had protected. She was the woman who had been shown honor. The rust devils were gone, and a new message had been sent to the entire city. This neighborhood, this woman, this child. They were not alone. The bad guys had become the ultimate good guys. The next day, Sarah went to work at the diner. She was still wearing Wrench's vest over her uniform. The customers looked at her differently. The truckers nodded in respect. The entire town looked at her differently. She was no longer a target. She was a symbol that kindness, even as small as a cup of coffee given in a storm, could summon an army. She was the living proof that honor still meant something in a world that seemed to have forgotten it. Her exhaustion was still there, but her fear was gone. In the end, this isn't just a story about bikers and a fire. It's a story about the complete failure of our safe systems and the surprising power of our feared subcultures. The system is designed to be slow, to be indifferent, and to protect itself first. But a code of honor is designed to be fast, to be personal, and to protect its own. Sarah, by showing simple human kindness, had accidentally stumbled into a family more powerful and more fiercely loyal than any she had ever known. Courage isn't the absence of fear. We all get scared. Sarah was terrified. Real courage is doing the right thing anyway. It's giving a cold man a warm cup of coffee when the world tells you to lock the door. It's refusing to let the world make you as cruel as it is. And sometimes, true strength isn't just bearing your burdens all alone. It's knowing that you've earned the right to have someone else, someone stronger, fight for you. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that heroes still exist. They don't always wear capes, and they don't always follow the rules. Sometimes they wear leather, and sometimes the scariest looking people are the only ones left who remember what honor really means. What would you have done in Sarah's place? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you on the next story.